No, I'm not worried at all. I rely on God, Allah.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today is a milestone podcast because we have our first female scholar on the program on the Life Haqq podcast. And so a really special one that we promise a lot of great gems, inshallah ta'ala. We have with us today Shaykha Fatima Barkatulla. She is an Islamic scholar. She is a teacher. She is a published author. And she is very active in the da'wah scene, especially in the UK. And so I would like to warmly welcome Shaykha Fatima Barkatulla to the Life Haqq podcast. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, sister.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for your invitation, and I'm honored to be on your podcast.
So before we get into different topics, I want to actually have you share your background with us, because just researching before this podcast, I discovered that you have a very rich background, and I was able to connect with some of that background because we come from the same era. And so a lot of what I saw, what you had to go through, I can really actually relate to that. So if you don't mind taking a few moments to actually just share your background with us.
Okay. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. My background. Well, I'm British. My parents came from India to Britain in the late 1970s. And I was born in Britain. I grew up in London, moved houses a lot during our childhood. So, but generally brought up in London. Alhamdulillah. My father is a scholar. He studied in Deoband. He's a mufti from Deoband. And so I guess from a young age, we grew up in a house where knowledge was very much valued, very much, scholarship was seen as a very honored and honorable thing. And my father was involved with setting up masajid and bringing more imams and people to the UK. He was involved in some of the big kind of institutes and things that existed then at that time. And so I grew up in that kind of household, I guess. And then when I was 16, I went abroad to Egypt to begin my more kind of formal Islamic studies, I would say. And I've been studying ever since, really. But in between that, I also got married. Alhamdulillah, I have 4 children. Yeah. What else would you like to know?
Oh, well, mashallah, because there's a lot of parallel, going on here, because my father immigrated here 70s. We also moved around a fair amount, and I think the first time I went overseas, I went to the Azhar in Lebanon to study at the Jamia there. So there's a lot of similarities with that. So I can completely understand the era that you came from and the challenges that you went through as well. If we look at the challenges today, I always do this comparative analysis. The challenges that you went through growing up, trying to hang on to your Islam and also grow in scholarship. What do you see as the major differences between the challenges we faced during our era and what people are facing, like the youth, especially sisters, are facing in this current era?
Wow, that's a big question. Well, I think in some ways things have gotten easier, and in some ways things have gotten harder, right? Every age, I guess, has its challenges, unique challenges. So when I was growing up, if my mom was like the only person wearing hijab, like going down the streets in London, and even though they were Muslims, people didn't really want to present as Muslims or maybe they just didn't have the knowledge, or they'd lost that connection with the deen. So but my mom did used to wear the hijab, and walking down the street with her as a child, people would swear at her. They would make racist comments, and that's something that we grew up with. That was normal. It's kind of normal. So that was a unique challenge. I was the first person in my school to be wearing the hijab. If you look at the school photo, when you do one of those like whole year photos, in my secondary school, a girls' school in London, in North London, Barnet, all of the girls have got like really short skirts, and you can see me straight away because, obviously I'm like fully covered and I've got a hijab, white hijab on, and I'm the only one. And it was like that, right? So subhanAllah, we were like the first people to sort of say, can we have a prayer room? It was like a completely new experience in that sense. And yeah, people treated hijab like, at first there was racism, and then maybe it was seen as a little bit of an interesting thing, depending on where you grew up, right? I remember one of my teachers at school asked me, like, he asked me one day, I came to school wearing a black hijab, and he said, because I usually wore a white one, and he asked me, Fatima, have you come of age? And I was like, no, I just felt like wearing black off today. It was that sort of era where everyone was a bit intrigued. And but now, I guess, in some ways it's amazing, because London, hijab is normal in London. There are parts of London like East London where niqab is normal, right? When I was looking for secondary schools for my sons, I went to some of the secondary schools that I would have probably considered for myself. And when I walked in, I remember one of the top secondary schools that, in our area, there was a huge picture of a girl in hijab doing science, right? Like in a lab. And I felt really emotional actually seeing that, because it was normal, it was being embraced. Whereas growing up, I was the only one. There was a whole conversation about whether I should wear a scarf in science or not, whether it was safe to use a Bunsen burner while wearing a hijab. And then, I was allowed to wear it as long as I tucked it into my lab coat, right? I mean, there were those kind of discussions going on at that time. And now it's just become embraced and normal. So in that sense, I think things have gotten a lot easier, right? The previous generation has established masajid, has established an infrastructure, right, for the next generation. Muslim schools, right? My children went to Yusuf Islam's school that he set up, right, back in the day. So in that sense, we're benefiting from all of that infrastructure and all of that. But in another sense, there are challenges, because when we were growing up, I think we felt very strongly, we were searching for our identity, right? Like, we wanted to know, what is Islam? What actually is Islam? Not just what have we heard, or we went back to the books and, wanted to almost like discover our deen from scratch. That's how it felt. But this generation, from what I'm seeing, doesn't really feel the need for that, right? They're kind of, in some ways, very comfortable in their skin. Well, it could be that I'm speaking about my own children, and they did go to a Muslim school, so that might have had a certain impact on them, right? But I'm seeing that they don't, because they haven't had the same, they haven't been the really the odd ones out, having to sort of assert their identity, search for their identity, constantly being questioned. They have a certain level of confidence, which is good. But then I guess on the other side of things, the internet, right? The social media and all of that has appeared, which we didn't grow up with. And that presents its own challenges, right? There's messaging going on that parents are not always aware of. There's family times are something that you have to create, right? They're not going to just happen. Even I remember back in the day, people used to think it was really bad to watch television together, right? As a family, and instead of sitting together and eating, everyone's watching TV together. Now, watching TV together would actually be family time, right? Like people don't even do that. Everyone is on their individual devices.
At least you're united on a singular screen, right?
Yeah, and you can talk about something that you're experiencing together, right? But what I mean is that we have to create those things. We have to create those human connections much more consciously, I think. But yeah, I mean, personally, I'm actually quite excited and positive about what things are like for my kids. That could be because I'm in London, and London is really a multicultural place, and it is very full of opportunity, you know. I actually see the future is very bright.
It seems like the community is really strong in London, especially.
Yeah, and also, I guess I'm also seeing how much easier certain things are. So, for example, when I wanted to go to Egypt to study, I couldn't just look it up on the internet, you know, like me and my dad had to take me there physically to have a look, to see what it was like. And then, you know, when I was left there, I was quite lonely. I had to work very hard to survive in that environment, you know. Whereas now I see my sons, and because I've got that experience and knowledge, I can sort of create the circumstances for them that will be a lot easier, probably. And I know where the pitfalls are, and, you know, of traveling abroad, and which places might be better to study in, and things like that. So if my sons want to go down that route, which some of them do, I feel more confident, you know. I can take them to Egypt. I can help them get into a university or an Arabic program. So in that sense, I feel quite positive. I know it's not like that for everyone. And I know there are lots of challenges out there because as a chaplain and just as, you know, a scholar involved in the community, I do help parents and with their children, and I do get those phone calls, you know, about some of the more challenging and difficult things going on. So I know people are being tested, especially with the kind of ideologies and things that are prevalent in our society at the moment. So I think one of the things that I think was very good when we were growing up was that there was this emphasis, and due to certain movements being around, there was an emphasis on aqidah, right? I know people don't like talking about aqidah anymore. You know, it's like, oh, it's all sectarianism, and yeah, it can, and it did have that negative effect as well, right, of sectarianism. But at the same time, when I studied aqidah, for example, I studied usul al-iman. One of my teachers was Sheikh Salah from America. And I remember the way he taught it. He taught us about secularism. He taught us about liberalism, you know, like about ideologies as well. It wasn't just about asma and sifat, you know, it was about almost like protecting yourself, your beliefs and your iman, right, from the potential modern day ideological attacks. I don't really think that has been sufficiently done for this generation. And I think that's why probably younger people find it very easy to fall into and adopt ideologies that just sound good, you know, they sound good because they haven't been given the they haven't been vaccinated against it, by being given that knowledge or that
given that strong
yeah,
foundation maybe of
exactly, yes, strong foundation and almost a certain type of skepticism and wariness, that was
yes.
instilled in us of foreign ideas.
Could you also equate that to the fact in the era that you grew up in, the difference between kufr and iman was really stark? Like you being the only muhajbi in your school, like the difference between what Islam is and what isn't Islam was pretty clear, and in a sense that can make you much more stronger in your belief, in your aqidah. But one of the challenges I see, because I also work with a lot of youth and people from a young age on upwards to young adult, and one of the challenges I would say that's prevalent in this era is that you have people who say, "Oh, I'm Muslim," but they have fundamental defects in their iman or their aqidah or their practice, but they don't feel the need to make tawbah against that. They don't feel it's wrong because they feel that's a normal part of being Muslim. And so, like, it was pretty clear in our era what is wrong. This is wrong. Even if you did the sin, you're like, hey, this is wrong, right? But nowadays, we're almost like living in an era where people don't. Hey, there's nothing wrong with believing that. Like they'll come up with these canned statements that really have no meaning to say, hey, like, yeah, this is all fine, and a Muslim is a Muslim, and without being able to define things, and it's really emotive in how they express most of their deen. You know what I mean? So, do you think that plays a role in it as well?
It's difficult because I think because I've seen the other side as well, like when things got really sectarian and people, Muslims started judging one another to such an extent that there were divisions and arguments and, even in ISOCs, Islamic societies, or I think in America they call them Muslim student associations, right?
Yes.
There was division, right? There were divisions, and that was not nice. There was a nastiness to that, right? But it could be that we've overcorrected, which is, because I feel like in the post 9/11 environment, people felt, well, listen, we need to start unifying, like we need to drop some of the sectarianism, and especially the things that are not really priorities right now in our context and are not really for the masses, for ordinary Muslims to be discussing. We need to drop that and we need to start, unifying. The problem is when unifying, it shouldn't mean erasing the boundaries, right? And the discussions, the important discussions. And I think maybe that ended up happening. We started thinking, well, let's just gloss over everything. When actually some things need to be clearly defined to our children, for example. Some things need to be clearly taught. And one of those things I believe is, our theology, basically, our basic theology. It's very important for that to be instilled, and not just for us not to just take it for granted that our children know it. They've just picked it up. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. But what I was trying to focus on more is not necessarily the emphasis on differentiating the differences in aqidah from an academic necessarily perspective, but in terms of like the understanding and practice of Muslims, for example, in our era, even though I know during that time in London there was a lot of these sectarian, a lot of debates and divisions, but the average Muslim, say whether they had differences in aqidah or not, the average Muslim, especially youth, it would be really clear. Like, this is a challenge maybe more so we're facing here in North America. but it would be really clear what's like acceptable and not acceptable. So you knew the path to become a good Muslim is that you have to give up certain things, right, to become that good Muslim. Whereas nowadays, people feel like almost a sense of privilege. Oh, I'm Muslim. Take me as I come. Doesn't matter if I'm sinning or not. Like, there's no, like, you don't feel you're doing anything wrong to make tawbah against. You know what I mean? Whereas, like, because the difference between kufr and iman was so stark, like, for example, we take it almost, it's almost like the flip side to the coin. We have more resources, we have more Muslims around us, but then you'll have like muhajjibat going to the clubs or going to certain parades and stuff like that, thinking, hey, we're doing good, we're doing activism. And so they don't feel the need to make tawbah against something like that, because, and it comes down to aqidah, right? Because it comes down to your misperception of what Islam and what Tawheed really is. Do you kind of understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, and what the boundaries are.
Yeah. So they don't feel like they're doing anything wrong.
I don't know, because I noticed that amongst the Americans that I met in Egypt, even at that time. So they were all going to the parties as well, like at the American university. And we thought that was quite strange, So I don't know if things have changed, or if it's a certain environment and attitude that's prevalent in that culture. I don't know, like, but yeah, you're right. Like, I think it's like that even here now. Like, I mean, people know the boundaries, I think. In certain areas, things are a bit more blurred. And that's because I think young people want something to belong to. And at universities, especially, because of the kind of certain groups, and especially on the left, are very active, right? And they're very accepting of Muslims, etc. A lot of young Muslims probably have found a sense of belonging there, amongst political groups and people on the left. But generally speaking, I think, especially in the circles that I move in anyway, I think people know what the boundaries are. What they're struggling with, like some time back, I've had mothers contacting me. The types of issues they contact me about are things like their daughter's self-esteem, just general things like self-esteem and feeling unattractive and feeling like hijab is a burden and things like that. That's still going on, I think that was there even when I was younger as well, like a lot of girls in my school, they were Muslims. They found it really hard to think of adopting the hijab, or, because I think women are so kind of under scrutiny, and their beauty and your appearance is so much a part of what's supposed to define you as a woman in modern times. And I don't think that's changed. If anything, that's gotten worse. And probably the hijab has now been misappropriated in a way that wasn't done when we were younger. So, for example, the other day I saw an advert from a makeup company. Okay, like I think it was Estee Lauder, and it was a hijabi vlogger, right? Wearing makeup, and they were saying, join this vlogger live for this session. She can show you how to wear makeup for the school run. Like, do you use that term, the school run, meaning to pick up your kids from school? Yeah, like they were trying to encourage. They're trying to encourage Muslim women, who they've obviously identified as moms, right, to look their best, like on the way to the school run. I mean, and they're using a hijabi vlogger to do that, to sell that, and this is like one of the premium, makeup companies, right, in the West. So
why are we so easily fooled by these types of marketing campaigns?
I think actually it's not even just that, it's everywhere. Like, we've even got like television personalities now who are hijabis, But ever since they kind of became famous, you can see that their hijab has kind of suffered, if you like, and you know, they're being used very much almost like to push this agenda of let's get Muslim women to be just as good consumers, if you like, of, you know, makeup, of this entire industry, this beauty industry, which basically thrives on making women feel insecure, right? Let's get Muslim women, the Muslim market, on board, right? And I don't think it's because people are gullible. I think women, human beings, but women in particular, do have a desire to be admired. You know, like obviously, Islamically, there's a time and a place for that, right? I mean, to be physically, to look good, to want to be beautiful, to be admired, basically, and that's kind of inbuilt. And I guess this whole industry kind of plays on that desire, but then makes you feel almost weird or insecure if you don't play along, you know, if you don't play along. And I think because of Instagram, because images have become so the currency, right, for communication now, like you're constantly following people and seeing people, it just naturally makes people feel insecure. It makes them feel like maybe I should be doing that as well. If everyone else is doing it, you know, maybe I should be doing it. So we've got that going on. And unfortunately, it feels like the hijab, you know, there's like this drive from the beauty industry, and you could even say from the online kind of hijabi industry, right? Parts of it, turn the hijab into a sort of accessory, you know? So it's just like a hairband or a turban or something that you're just using as an accessory. That shouldn't stop you from now beautifying yourself and making yourself basically sexually attractive, you know, in public, which is completely un-Islamic, the opposite of what Islam wants. And I think what happens is human beings are, Shaitan is very clever, and, you know, these things are a slippery slope. And so what happens is you lower your standards a little bit, and then you lower them a little bit more. And then things just start becoming normal in society to the point where everyone is doing it. And so I think it's really important for people to speak about it and to say, no, that isn't congruent with hijab. That's not congruent with the way Islam wants women to be in public. You know, of course, makeup, beauty, these things are wonderful. They've got a place for them and a time for them. With your spouse, with women, with your maharim, right? Like when you're in a party, a women's party, that kind of environment, fine, you know, go all out, do whatever you want to do. But in the public space, in front of non-mahrams, we have a uniform. We have a certain way that we have to conduct ourselves, right? And that's for our own good. That's what makes a healthy and productive and positive society. And if we break those boundaries, and if we start blurring the lines and start turning hijab into just another accessory, then it loses its meaning. And I think Muslim women are being targeted for that, because throughout history, if you read like Frantz Fanon and, you know, what he was talking about was happening in Algeria, right? Throughout history, whenever, of course, in those days, it was physical colonization, right? When Muslims were being physically colonized, the fastest route that was seen to changing Muslim society was to change the women. You know, like the French in Algeria, they literally had advertising campaigns telling Muslim women that if they uncovered, they were beautiful. Aren't you beautiful? Those kind of ad campaigns, right? So playing on a woman's natural desire to be attractive, they kind of put pressure even on the men to, those of them who would be as liberal as possible and as French as possible, they would get higher ranks and they would be able to move in the society, etc. Right? And so Muslim women have always been, and it's not just in Algeria, just think about Afghanistan as well. There's this constant obsession with women. Let's use the women as the reason to bomb the country, basically, right? Like, we love these women so much, we care about them so much, we have to bomb their men and destroy their country, right? Like, it's like this crazy misuse of Muslim women in order to basically penetrate Muslim society. And we know that is the fastest way.
They keep promoting this grift that they're there to help represent Muslim women, even like, as you say, in these different campaigns. They try to show it's actually a noble reason. Oh, we have this fashion democracy where we're going to now showcase people wearing hijab and overweight people and
diversity,
like all sorts of different so they're trying to give it like it's almost like the outer appearance, you try to be as diverse as possible, but then it seems like you can look how you want as long as we own your mind.
You can look how you want as long as you use our products as well. Like,
exactly. That's not the people forget the main motivation. The more representation they show, the more customers they're going to have coming through their door.
And but I think it means more than that. If you can get Muslim women to change their hijabs, if you can get Muslim women to stop having that affinity with basically obeying Allah, right? That connection with Allah. If you can stop them from having that connection with Allah and see hijab as only like I said, an accessory, then basically you've detached them from the deen, right? You've been successful in detaching them from Allah, from their religion, from the thing that should be motivating them to observe hijab, right? People sometimes don't say this enough. I think that the reason why we wear hijab, the reason why we dress as we dress in public, is because it's a command from Allah, right? It's not anything else really. I mean, all the other explanations for it, modesty and this and that, those are maybe some of the wisdoms, right? But the real reason why we do it is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran commanded us to do that, told the believing women, right? And so it's an act of faith, it's an act of obedience to Allah. Now, if you can get women to stop seeing it as that, right? And to start just, relaxing their standards and then again taking part in this culture, in the culture of basically trying to attract men and men trying to attract women, etc., then you've sort of broken down something quite fundamental, right? You've broken down that connection. So I do see it as way more than just selling products. Selling products is part of it, but I think it's basically, Shaitan said he's going to try everything he can, right, to turn us away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He wants to see the downfall of the children of Adam, and he's going to use all sorts of means. And I think one of the means he will use is women, is trying to get to the women, because if you can get to the women, you can get to the children, and if you can get to the children, you get the entire society and the whole generation, right, to come. So this is why I actually see women as very important in any dawah effort, and that's why I set up Muslim Womanhood, because I really feel that just as, the corruption of society can happen through women. Of course it can happen through anyone, but what I mean is, just as the enemies of Islam have always targeted women as a means to corrupting Muslim societies, we can target and elevate women and our sisters in Islam in order to revive the entire community, because if we can have if our sisters are thinking in the right way, conveying the right messages to their children, it's going to be the fastest route, again, to the entire community and the next generation also being on the right path, inshallah.
So what are some specific programs and strategies you feel we need to implement with the women in our community to help protect them, preserve their deen in the face of the barrage of all this different type of messaging, and allow them to prosper?
I think it's on so many fronts, right? It's a bit overwhelming, actually, but we have to start somewhere. I think university students are very important, because university is a place. A lot of girls are going to university now, right? It's kind of expected, whether you're Muslim or not. And I think university is a place where, for the first time, you're sort of away from your parents. You're thinking, and you're being encouraged to think critically. You're being encouraged to question everything. And you're in an environment where you're meeting people who you might not have really met before. And so I think that's really a pivotal time to make sure that you shore up your iman, really, and your ability, almost like you immunize yourself against foreign ideologies. So I think there needs to be a concerted effort to roll out programs in universities because at the moment what's happening, it seems, at least here, is university students, they proactively contact du'at, right? And they'll say, can you come and talk about X, Y, or Z? That's okay, but actually something more proactive on the du'at's part needs to be in place, right? Like, we should be setting a program that we're offering, for example, students, and saying that we'll come to university, we'll take you through this entire curriculum, for example, or we'll take you through this set of courses, or whatever it is. One of the things that I found really had a really good effect, inshallah, I think it did, from the feedback that I got, was going to universities. And, when they asked me to give a talk on a particular topic, I actually said to them, look, why don't we just have an open Q&A, like completely open, no question is off limits. Like, allow people to submit questions, either written or in person, and say there is no question off limits. And sometimes we restricted the topic to do with relationships, or sometimes we left it unrestricted. And I think those sessions have been the most beneficial. And I've done sessions like that for teenagers as well as university students. And the kinds of questions you get, you realize what's going on in people's minds, in young people's minds, women's minds and girls' minds. And a lot of them express this kind of relief, actually, at being able to just talk about it, and ask the question and then be given a satisfying answer. So with the teenagers, I got questions like, for example, why can't we have boyfriends? Now, that might sound really basic to some of us, but if you think about it, when you're young, I remember what it was like. You're surrounded by girls. If you're going to a regular school, you're surrounded by girls who've all got boyfriends, or they're in that zone, and it's natural for you as a girl to start feeling, well, why am I the odd one out? You feel odd. You have a desire to be desired. Every human being has a desire to be desired. And if your parents, or if you can't see how that is ever going to be satisfied, or if that's ever, you can't see the path forward really, you can start feeling lonely, you can start feeling down, about that. And I think that's something that's actually affecting a lot of young girls, that feeling of, what is the path to satisfying that desire I have to be connected to a man, or connected to, to get married, really. That's what the answer is. But they can't see a path forward, and they're seeing their peers easily interact with the opposite sex and have relationships, but obviously they're not seeing the negative side of those relationships. And so, I think we have to become really attuned.
I almost wish in those sessions you could have a follow-up session where it's mandatory for parents to be there, because oftentimes, you can give that advice to that teenager or that young adult, but you want to be able to have the parent there and say, listen, you have to help facilitate the halal. You have to help facilitate the khair for your children, because look at what they're dealing with. I almost wish you could make a mandatory session. You both have to be there.
Sometimes I share with them my own experience, and I've done this with parents as well, separately. And that is that when I was a teenager, I told you I went to Egypt. I went there to study, but I actually ended up meeting somebody who I wanted to marry instead. And my parents freaked out, probably back at home here in the UK. But they didn't show me that they had freaked out. My mom just sort of got the first plane to Egypt. And the way they handled that entire situation was so amazing that at first I used to hesitate to share it with people, because obviously it's like a very personal thing that happened. And I guess now I don't really feel worried about sharing it so much, because I can actually see the benefit, because people assume that if you're brought up in a religious family, right, that you're never going to have the desire to marry somebody, proactively, or you're never going to meet somebody and basically fall in love or want to be with that person, But these are like really strong, instinctual, hormonal things, that are inside us. It doesn't matter if you've been brought up in a religious family or not. When you have those strong feelings, the good thing is that if you're brought up in a religious family, you're probably, inshallah, not going to act on them in a haram way, right? You're just going to want to marry that person, right? Yes. Which was the case for me, right?
And I think that's what people should appreciate, is that religion, deen, isn't there to eradicate those feelings, but channel it in the best outcome possible, right? So that you have the most noble outcome from those feelings.
So like a mom, she told me that her daughter was abroad, and by the way, I don't recommend sending your daughters abroad by themselves, but anyway, she said her daughter was abroad, and she'd met somebody, and she told her parents she really wants to marry this person, and they're really worried because she's very young, and same with me. I was 16, basically, and the person who I wanted to marry was older than me, but the way my mom handled it, I shared it with that mother, and I told her, maybe you can learn something from this. You might benefit from this, and that is that she showed me a lot of love. That's what she did. She came to Egypt, she hugged me. She said, "Oh my God, this place is terrible. You must have been so lonely here." She had a go at my dad and said, how could you leave our daughter in this place, like this type of accommodation and whatever, right? My dad is like into dropping people into the deep end so that they learn to swim. And she basically moved me out of the very lonely kind of situation that I was in, and moved me in with some really excellent sisters from the UK and from America as flatmates. And that completely changed everything, you know. I think you can't really overstate the importance of who you're hanging out with, you know. I think that's very important. And then my mom did a wonderful thing. She said, she was very intimate with me, you know, in the sense that she was very close to me and showed me a lot of love and allowed me to open up to her about what I was experiencing and what I was feeling. And she said, look, she tried to find out, you know, like how I had met this person and things like that. And she realized that I just wanted to marry this person. And so she said, look, why don't you take me to his house? You know, like, why don't you take me to meet his family? And Allah knows what is good for you. And, you know, if this is the right person, then we'll help you get married. Which was really cool of her to say.
Yeah.
I would never react like that with my daughter, right? But that's what my mom did. And literally I was like, okay then, you know. And I take my mom to his house, and I think just seeing her in the same room as him, and something just happened, you know, like I just realized who I was and what family I was from and why I was in Egypt and all of those things, you know. And suddenly these rose-tinted glasses that had been over my eyes just fell away. It was a strange experience. So one moment I'm a 16-year-old who's thinking, this is it, you know, this is the person. There's nothing, you know, and that's what happens, isn't it? Like when you're that age, you think this is the one, sort of thing, right? And then the next minute I'm like, oh my God, he doesn't pray. He, you know, I started realizing that the things I was judging him on as being the ideal person were not my usual standards, were not the things that really matter, you know? And for some reason, having my mom in the same room as him allowed that to happen, that realization. And so then, without even saying anything, my mom said, yeah, so, you know, we've started the process. Let's see how it goes, you know? My mom took the fight away from the situation. Do you see? There was no fight in there anymore. There was no...
Yes.
Do you see? There's no forbidden fruit at all.
Yes. You didn't feel the need to rebel against parental authority.
Right. Or like, you know, because whether we like it or not, we've grown up on Disney, right? Like we've grown up on Princess Jasmine, you know, wanting to marry this guy who her dad won't let her marry, and, you know, and he's showing her the world and, you know, taking her away from the law that's so oppressive, right? We've grown up with that. That's in there somewhere, I think. And sometimes we don't realize how it's affected us, you know, but I'm sure it has. And I think the way my mom handled it meant, like you said, there's no fight there. There's no need to rebel because, oh, I could marry this person. You know, my parents are not against it. And so then I just slowly stopped wanting to marry that person, you know. It just happened. It was strange. But my parents were clever enough to know that that was a sign that I should probably get married, you know. And so I did very soon after that, you know. They helped me to find somebody and to get married. So the reason why I shared it, because I think you said something about, you know, or we were discussing like showing young people that there is a way, you know. And when you start seeing that your daughter or your son has got that inclination, right? They're having those feelings. Doesn't matter how religious the family is or what. I mean, sometimes Muslim parents can be quite prudish about these things, you know.
I think the recipe that you articulated, which is important, is that they're giving you the almost like the choice or a little bit of freedom and your own volition for decision making,
Right.
but they didn't do that without giving you a foundation. And that's something I actually reflect with even my own father. With any decision I would make in life, he said, just remember who you are and where you come from. This is all you, even for a job. Like I remember when I was 15 and 16, I was going to look for a job, just a part-time job. And he said, listen, you can do anything, right? But he's like, I'm going to give you the same advice my older brother gave me when I, immigrated to Canada. He said, remember who you are and where you come from. Like you can go work in a bar, you can work as like, whatever different type of environment, that you can get a job in, but you should select a job where you can maintain your dignity, your honor, where you can develop a certain type of skills more than just a paycheck, right? And so this was the type of pattern that even my own father would instill in me, is that, yeah, okay, you're out there, you're looking for stuff, but just remember who you are. And you can't say that unless you've taught them, like, this is the principles that you should stand for, or these are, I think that's the important recipe. Because sometimes what I see nowadays with many parents, we just let them, the children will show us the way. No, the children need to be taught the way first, and then they can show you the way that they end up, choosing and things like that.
And also, I think just that there was never one moment that I didn't feel Allah was with me, like even there were times in Egypt when I was really lonely because I couldn't speak Arabic when I turned up there, and I just kept getting lost, basically, and I would sometimes not have the money, and there was some difficult situations that I experienced. But I always felt like Allah was there, and even whatever I was experiencing and feeling, I was talking to Allah throughout. I think that was something my mum gave me, and that's a gift that we should give our children. Instead of getting them to turn to us or turn to this means or that means, encourage them to get used to talking to Allah, because then you're instilling in them that Allah is with them and Allah is watching them always, right? So yeah, I think the way my mum handled it, I encourage parents that, first of all, disowning your children, right, or kind of throwing them out or making them feel like you're ostracizing them, that's not going to work in a society that is ready to embrace them. The society out there is ready to embrace them. There's a world out there that's ready to take them on if you're going to throw them out, right? That's never the way. But I think some parents, they do overreact, in situations. The second thing is, we don't own our children. And I think that's an attitude that my dad always had. He didn't act like he owned us, but rather that he was facilitating us in this world, So, and unfortunately, a lot of parents, they actually act like they think they own their kids, to the extent that they will not allow their daughters to even think of marriage, for example, right, at a certain age. If their daughter brings it up, they act like, it's a taboo. They overreact. Or they put all sorts of restrictions and, conditions and that are almost impossible to meet, in the candidate that they want their daughter to marry, or they allow their daughter to marry. If you have the attitude that actually we don't own our kids, they are an amanah from Allah, we're here to facilitate them and help them to live the best life that they can in service to Allah, then it takes away in your mind that need to feel like you have to control every element of their life, So I think the fact that my parents almost gave me that respect, that actually you have the right to like somebody, for marriage. You have the right to choose and to have your own preferences, I think that's hugely important for this. If it was important to me, it's important to every young person, especially growing up in the West. because the outside world does give you that respect, that sense anyway. You have freedom, you have autonomy. If your parents don't allow you to feel that, then of course you're going to start feeling like you're being oppressed, right?
Yes.
So I think
what about the flip side to that? Like if you have a parent who's reasonable, but as we know, our parents have more experience than us. They may have more knowledge than us, and they see this is a really bad decision you're going to make. What would your advice be for both parties? For the parents, like, this is going to be a tragic decision. You should not do this, right? Like, do the parents have the right to voice their opposition? And should children also listen to that? Like, where do you strike that balance, right? Because you can go from one extreme to the end. Like, you don't know anything. You don't know, like, this person is the best person in the world.
Yeah. So I think there's two things there. One is that when you give somebody respect, so I mean, I think that was kind of the situation that I was in, right? This person was not good for me. Yeah, he was way older than me. Not old enough for me to think he was too old, but anyway, he was older than me, probably bigger age gap than was wise. And also, he wasn't a practicing Muslim. Like, he expressed the desire to be practicing, but he really wasn't, so he wasn't Muslim father material, right? So probably my mom did. And also he was from quite a simple background, not that matters, but if you're used to a certain standard of living, right? Parents have all of that in mind, right? They're thinking of all of that kind of long-term stuff. When you're attached to somebody, you don't care about all of that stuff, and probably because we've grown up with romantic notions from Hollywood of none of this stuff mattering, when actually it does matter. When you actually start living with somebody, all of that stuff matters. So yeah, you're right. Like, our parents have that foresight. But what I'm trying to say is that by showing you that they're actually willing to consider, your choice, you allow your child to then be open to everything else you want to say about it, right? So, okay, we went to see this thing. Okay, this person, we went to see them. So now when we go home, mom can have a conversation with me and I'm not going to feel defensive. Like, I liked this about him, I like that about him. But what about this? What about that? And you're getting that person to think. And also the fact that you've put marriage on the table means that now the person is really having to think seriously. It's not just like this hazy romantic notion anymore. It's real. It could potentially be real. So I think a sensible child who you've brought up would then revert to, now, instead of being in like some kind of magical land of romance, they will actually snap out of that and start thinking practically. But the second thing is that you've got to be having these conversations with those kids as they're growing up,
Yes.
So even now, before my sons are even ready to even think about marriage, I'm talking about to them things like, what makes a good wife? And it seems like a weird conversation to have, right? But if you don't start getting them to think in that way, how are they ever gonna, when they start having the hormones and the feelings, and those feelings are kind of clouding their judgment, it's kind of too late. So I think because I'd been brought up constantly with my mum anyway, being told what a good Muslim man is, what a good father is, and the things she used to praise in my father were the things I wanted, in a spouse. And so I think we shouldn't make those conversations taboo. We should be having those conversations as if my mom says to me, even now, she says, let the young people feel that they've got love and romance and in their future. It's going to happen, you know. Because what we do is we say, okay, let's not talk about it at all. Let's make it a taboo subject. So when they're actually feeling it, they feel they can't talk to us about it, or they feel like there's something oppressive there. So like there was a brother who contacted me recently. He said that he found out that his young daughter is very enamored by kissing, basically, right? And she seems to be like looking up on the internet the word kissing, right? She's become like, she's a little girl. Okay. And he's like, he is freaking out, really freaking out. Okay. And he said, I've blocked certain words and I've done this and I've done that. And I don't know what to do. I've told her that, this is yucky stuff. This is, I said, well, why have you told her that? You just tell her, look, when you grow, this sounds funny, right? But it's true. It's true. You can say, oh yeah, when you grow up, you can do that with your husband. And he thought that was quite crazy to say that. Okay. But I said, if you say, make a joke out of it, just say, when you grow up, you can, I said a certain phrase, okay, with your husband. And he said, the brother laughed. And I said, you'll probably get her to laugh. She'll probably, or she might cringe, she'll cringe. She'll be like, and then that'll be the end of it. You've taken the, stop turning everything into a fight. It doesn't have to be like that. And also show your children that, first of all, in and of itself, that thing is not disgusting. It's disgusting because it's being done in public, or it's being done, in the wrong way, or it's with the wrong people, right? So why are we trying to make our children think something that is actually halal in the right context is disgusting? We shouldn't be doing that. We should instead be showing them, oh yeah, that thing, there's a halal outlet for that, and you'll find out one day.
Yeah, I need to have the right conversation.
That gives them a healthier connection with Islam as well. That it's not just this thing that keeps shutting down their natural feelings and shutting down their. But at the same time, obviously, you want to have a conversation. If you've got a child who's starting to get curious about these things, you want to have a conversation and say, look, there's going to be a time and place for that sort of stuff, When you get married, you're going to have a wonderful romantic relationship, give them that, let them feed into that, the dream of marriage. But then also say to them, look, if you start looking at things now, right, certain types of shameless things that people are doing, certain types of, nakedness or haram and these kinds of things, it could affect you negatively in your future. It will affect you because some images, they can't be taken out of your mind, or they affect the enjoyment that you will have in your life in the future. I think if you have a conversation like that in a more balanced way, right, rather than shutting it down and calling it disgusting, and, show them that there's this halal outlet for it. But for now, this is not the right way, and this is going to harm you in the long term. I think most young people are intelligent enough to take that on board.
How important do you think it is for do you think it's a significant influence, the parents' relationship that they have with each other, for their children's future relationships that they will have with their spouse?
That's scary, isn't it? Yeah. Of course, I think that goes without saying. But I think sometimes when you look at your own parents' relationship, you think, wow, that was like the ideal, right? Like that's how we usually view it. Yeah. And then those of us who had parents who were very wise, very together. Yeah, I think as parents, we always have to be conscious that the patterns of behavior that we're exhibiting are being picked up. They're being picked up because we are the norm for our children. We become the norm, which is really scary. But it should motivate us to fix up and to sort problems out. If you're having problems, don't allow them to fester. Don't allow them to kind of spill out in front of the children. Deal with them properly. Get help, get counseling, get whatever it is you need. Learn how to communicate better. I really believe in self-development for couples, even if you're not doing it together. As human beings, you just need to keep doing things that are going to be, part of your self-development. And as you do that, you become more self-aware. I think every couple needs to sit down and write a vision for their family. And I know some people think that's quite kind of over the top. I think my husband thought that initially as well. But, she's getting her diary out again to sort she's treating our family like a corporate entity. No, it's not that. It's just that I think we already had a vision, but kind of being explicit about it helps. It's like your North Star, right? Like it allows you to say, okay, this is what we're always going to revert to. And to remind ourselves that, so for me, for example, any decision that's being made, which school is our child going to go to, we're usually on the same page. But if we're not, if there's like a particular choice, and I'll put my case forward, and passionately, but I know that my husband's the head of the house. He's going to make the final decision. And I'm glad about that as well. Like it takes the pressure off. And that's because we've gone into marriage with the understanding, that there is a head of the house. There is a head of the house. It's not, we don't believe in this kind of weird it's a partnership in the sense that, we are helpers of each other, right? We're helping each other. But just like, I'm going to use the analogy of a company, there is a CEO, there's somebody who the buck stops with, has to make the final decision. Any good CEO who has a team will consult his team, right? Like he'll consult, he'll take on board their views, their desires, their issues, everything, right? And then make a decision. So in the same way, Muslim family has a CEO, has somebody in charge. And I think it's really important for couples to come together, and even if you've got older kids, to bring them in as well and say, look, what is our family all about? What's the most important thing to us? So I think that's a very important practice. And in that, so something that my family do, I think is beneficial, inshallah, is annually we sit together, or more like I drag everyone together, and we assess the year. We look at the past year, and I kind of go around to my children and say, okay, 3 things you achieved this year, and so we get to celebrate that. Oh, wow, you memorized this, or you've learned to swim this year. You went on this trip, or you completed your studies, or whatever it is, whatever 3 things, they each get to kind of integrate that into their personality, right? So I think that's what it's about as well. Like actually standing back and thinking, yeah, I did that. Alhamdulillah, I managed to do that.
Yeah.
Gives you that sense of gratitude. But then we also say, okay, what things did not go well this year? That's a hard one, because then the children, they'll tell you, where they think you're going wrong as a parent, right? You kept picking me up late every day this year from school. Please don't do that. Okay, that's a new. So then we make a new intention for the year ahead, right? Or whatever it is, whatever issues there are. And so each person has to think of goals that they're going to have for the year ahead, and literally write them down. Good. Well, I write them down, and it's great because then the next year, when you open that up, you're like, oh, these were the 3 things you said you wanted to achieve this year. And obviously, like, if you're doing it for yourself, it's probably going to be more than 3 things. But for a kid, it's getting them into the habit of thinking like that. I just chose the number 3, and I think it's helpful.
Oh,
because
100%.
it really gets them to start thinking time is important.
We do something similar. We have a weekly family halaqa, and they bring their notebook and they bring their planner. And so what we do is like we have the halaqa, and then we plan the week. We discuss the challenges that we had this week, how we're going to meet those challenges in the upcoming week. And then my son, he's too young, right, to write in a journal. But my daughters, they write in a journal every night, and then they show me their journal and their planner. And so in their journal, they just summarize their day, any challenges they faced, and then they have to come up with solutions to overcome those challenges. And those challenges can just be even self-development goals. Like I got angry with my sister because she did this. But then instead of like leaving it at that, she has to come up with a solution. How can you make that situation better, right? And so it's really good, because then now they are doing that type of problem, getting more in focused from towards problem solving, rather than just just looking at the problem, without any beneficial outcome, so we have a little bit of a similar thing that we have in our house.
But you see, that's amazing, because what you're doing there, I mean, there's so many things going on there, right? There's your dad really cares about you. He's involved in your life. I think for girls, that's amazing and really important. And then, your parents, as parents, what's going on. You're not, see, one of the things the reason why I started doing this is because I noticed what can happen, and what sometimes did happen in the previous generation was things were not really talked about. So if one of your siblings or somebody was having a problem, that would sometimes go unnoticed. And it would just carry on for years and years and years. And then later on, you've all grown up and that person has got a real problem. And you're having a discussion and you're like, oh, I didn't realize you had that experience throughout your childhood and nobody dealt with it or nobody sorted that out, And I think part of it is because sometimes our parents' generation kind of just let us get on with it, right? Obviously, they didn't have that having family meetings mindset. Usually they didn't, I don't think. But I think for me, I don't want to let anything grow, any problem grow to such an extent that it becomes really damaging, because problems are inevitable in every family, in every situation. Your children are going to face problems. Sometimes it's just their personality, something that they're facing, something they have to overcome. If they can't air it, if they can't speak to somebody and deal with it, those problems can end up becoming pathological problems, I think.
Yeah, 100%. What do you think are some of the worst advices that are being propagated, especially for sisters? Like sometimes you see online some of the most stupid, destructive, ignorant advices by people really who don't have knowledge or experience. But what are some of the worst advices you feel are being propagated right now?
Some of the worst advice to sisters, and what do you mean, like from Muslims, from du'at? And
like from like whether it's du'at, whether it's just the average Muslim. Like I like, for example, you have some very good advice in terms of like how to select a spouse or to kind of go through that process. You see some of the advices that are being thrown out there online on how to select, or what their expectations are, as you mentioned, like this whole Disney Hollywood fantasy that doesn't exist. So what do you think are some of the worst, most destructive advices that are being promoted amongst the sisters?
I think one of the most destructive is a lack of clarity on what men and women really are, even, and what to expect in marriage. So it's quite, the term toxic masculinity is very prevalent now, right? And if you sometimes listen in or see kind of conversations that are going on, you see, okay, people are labeling masculinity not as toxic, like just being male, just having a male personality, a masculine personality for a man, and things that Islam would encourage or celebrate, like a man showing leadership, being the head of the house, taking control of the finances, being protective over his family, right?
Yeah,
like
they're shaming that.
Yeah, that is all being cast as some kind of toxic masculinity. And I remember I had this conversation with one of my friends, and she said, I don't know how this next generation of girls is going to survive, because every time their spouse is going to show manliness, in his personality, they're going to freak out and label it as something negative, which I am a little bit perplexed about, because, like there was certain messaging that was given to us, isn't it, like, growing up. But we would always think of our parents, in the back of your mind, you always had your parents, and you think, oh, dad is the breadwinner, dad is, maintaining, he's the one who goes out, and he's the one who does this, and he's the one who does that, and mom is the one who does this. It was kind of clear, so I don't know if those young people don't have those role models, or if they're looking down on those traditional setups, but for me, I remember I always thought my parents were the ideal, because around me were single moms, like in the area that we lived in, a lot of single moms, a lot of women whose spouses were abusive, or not even spouses, boyfriends, right? And I just saw the Muslim families, or at least my family, as, wow, we're just like the ideal. This is how it's supposed to be, But the messaging is so deep. Like, there's obviously been some messaging throughout their childhoods. And I remember even in Muslim school, even though it was a Muslim school, I remember attending an assembly and the head teacher getting the girls to chant girl power, right?
Yeah.
And some of us parents were standing there like, why is he doing that? Like, there's boys here and girls, right? Like, why are you singling out the girls and getting them to chant girl power or something to do with that? That is the sort of stuff that our girls are obviously being brought up with.
Yeah.
And so I think at home, you've got to be, well, first of all, go and talk to your school if they're doing stuff like that, but if at home, you've got to show them and talk about these things, if you show your children, like, for example, if there's a decision that needs making and you have a discussion with your spouse, even if you're very passionate about it, but then he makes the final decision, you've modeled there, the kind of way a Muslim family is supposed to function, right? And if you make that the norm and you talk about it as well, don't just assume that they're just picking it up. So if your child asks you, why didn't you do that? Or why? Well, because, Abba made the decision, and I respect his decision. He took everything into account, and he made the decision. He's the head of the house.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong in us actually explicitly saying that. And we've got to be more explicit, I think, now, because we can't take it for granted that the children are internalizing that.
Yeah.
We want manly men, don't we?
do you feel gender ideology is confused? Like you've posted some criticism about some of the issues arising from gender ideology. Do you think that's also playing a role in this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, sadly, I had a mum contact me some time back, and she said that her daughter had started wearing boys' clothes and like going to the shops and buying clothes from the men's section. And she didn't mind because, you know, she was just looking for loose clothes, you know, to wear. Like, and the men's clothes are usually looser. That's not really a big deal, I guess, in that sense, because she was a muhajjaba. But then over time, she said her daughter got fixated on this idea. I have no idea how. Even the mother didn't have any idea how, right? But she put it down to her friends at school and just the school environment. That she felt that she was a man, or she felt that she was attracted to the, you know, to the same sex. And this was something that was being encouraged in this daughter of hers by her friends and her peers. And they were saying to her, you know, you need to come out and you need to, you know, they were like, and she was being encouraged to label herself. And it was heartbreaking because the mum, she said, you know, we're a religious family. Like, we brought our children up with Islam. But there were some things that I identified in the kind of the trajectory and the story that I think we as parents need to be aware of. One of those things I think that's very important is actually talking about these things explicitly with our kids. You know, like, don't wait until they've discovered it through their friends and then, you know, it's become a thing, right? For you to have even poked at that discussion at, you know, on some level. Because when they're younger, there's obviously things they're going to see and they're going to notice. And that's your chance. When they're very young, that's your chance to start instilling the norms into your children. They need to know the norms. Yes, men and women are different.
Especially what's being shown on children's, even now today, the new children's programming, cartoons, programs.
Yeah,
they're already bringing a lot of this messaging in front of them. So if you wait to till they're older, yeah.
Exactly. And sometimes Muslim parents feel like they have to be politically correct for some reason, right? Who said we have to be politically correct? We should have a healthy disdain, right? And we should instill in our children a healthy disdain for haram things, for weird things, right? For unnatural things, for things that we know are against the natural order. And sometimes Muslim parents are so like falling over themselves trying to be politically correct. They say, oh, we don't want to say anything about this. Or no, if you're not going to say it, then who's going to say it? You know, one of the ways that human beings stay sane is by social pushback, right? People pushing back at you when you act a bit weird, or you do something a bit extreme, or you're being a bit too narcissistic, whatever it is. If you're pushed back on, that's how you kind of know what your boundaries are and you know what the norms are. If nobody pushes back on you, you become a fully blown narcissist, right? Or you end up having a personality disorder, probably, right? In the same way, in society, if we don't push back on things that are quite insane, really, that are going on, right? We will become part of that insanity. We will be complicit. We will be complicit. And I don't see it as any different to, you know, when the Germans ended up becoming Nazis, and you look back and you think, well, why didn't they see that it was so bad, you know, what they were doing? Why did they all just accept it? And just so many people, it's because nobody said anything. when small things were going on. And then when worse things started going on, nobody said anything. And then they just become acclimatized to it, right? To the madness.
Yes.
Yes. I sound very unpolitically correct. I'm trying to be careful, how I express this. But
yeah, no, but you're absolutely correct. Like so many things are being normalized, where if you just take even a step back out of the bubble, you realize how insane it is. Like, for example, the normalization of death, especially here in Western culture, where they're trying to destigmatize suicide. They, think about how many people are bombed and killed overseas, and there's less and less to little to no outrage. Whether you look at the abortion issue, all the list goes on and on. The lack of sanctity for human life has become more and more normalized. Yeah,
and look, if we could go back to what I was saying about Shaitan, this is what Shaitan promised. He was going to do this. He wants the downfall of human beings, of the children of Adam, regardless of whether they're Muslim or not, right? He wants the downfall of Bani Adam. And so he's going to make us do weird things and start accepting weird things. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us, the Muslims, khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas. Why? Because we enjoin the good and we forbid the evil and we believe in Allah. That's the condition for us being the best ummah, right? Not that we stand by and watch society degenerate. We have to be the ones we are the leaders. We are literally the leaders. And one of the amazing things that's happened in the West is we have clearly become the leaders, because Christians are not anymore. It's supposed to be the Christian West. Britain, the Queen is the head of state. She's the head of the Church of England. But Christianity has become such a toothless, meaningless thing now. It has no clout. It has no power. It has no teeth. There's no, it doesn't demand anything of anyone anymore, right? To such an extent that we have naturally, I think we stand out as leaders quite naturally. And I think even the right are kind of noticing that. I don't know if you noticed in the conversation with, when Jordan Peterson has conversations with Duat, or with the few Muslims he's had conversations with, that's one of the things that really stands out, I think. That Muslims are the leaders. They're leading the way in terms of morality. They're leading the way in terms of having an anchor, a moral anchor that they're asserting unapologetically, right? If you look at what, the recent documentary, What is a Woman, right? On the Daily Wire, Matt Walsh, he's a Christian. But not once could he ever bring a Christian argument. You know what I mean? Like, he could never talk about God. He could never talk about anchoring it in anything, but he's kind of playing into the same thing, right? Like talking about science and common sense.
Yeah.
Okay, common sense. But what happens when people have lost their common sense? Something else needs to be there that anchors people. And the Christians have become so scared to even mention God. They won't even mention God. They won't even mention guidance from God or the laws of God, because obviously they have problematic relationship with the law themselves, right? So we have emerged. I think that's one of the amazing things, actually. And I like to think positively about what's happened. Everything that happened after 9/11, there's a lot of negative stuff, people, Islamophobia, and people talk about the Islamophobia. But I think out of that Islamophobia came, first of all, a massive amount of interest in Islam, right? Conversions to Islam definitely increased. Maybe people turning away from Islam also increased because of the pressure, because of the Islamophobia. I'm not sure about that, but I definitely know from the research that I've done during my master's, I was doing some research on conversion to Islam. And after 9/11, many mosques, centers have talked about, the number of people who just contacted them to want to embrace Islam. So that's happened. But also we've emerged as Muslims, we've emerged as being able to provide moral leadership. And I'll give you one example. In Britain, the people who are really leading when it comes to preventing all of this gender ideology from being in schools are the Muslims. And Christians are really thankful towards Muslims for being so firm on that, you know. Muslim parents are literally protesting outside schools, you know, don't mess with Muslim children, you know, don't mess with our children. That's the message. And it's kind of awakening a whole generation of parents who are thinking, yeah, you know, why are our children being indoctrinated with this stuff? They're not even allowed to talk about religion properly at school. Why are they talking about this stuff, you know? So yeah, I think we've got the opportunity to provide moral leadership. If we sink and if we start buying into the degeneracy, right, then we won't be able to provide that moral leadership. And before anyone tries to label us as phobic of this or that, ultimately, we're talking about the health of society. We're doing this out of compassion, you know. We're doing this because we want healthy, thriving societies, and we don't want the destruction of the family. And that's what's happening in the West, and that's causing misery to the very people who think that, you know, we are against them or something like this. It's causing them misery, and it's causing the West to spiral into this terrible place, right? And we as Muslims, out of compassion, and I think that's what da'wah is really ultimately, right? The ultimate show of compassion and love for your fellow human being is not that you allow them to fall and to, you know, as one of my friends said, if I have dirt on my back, how will I know if you don't tell me, if my sister doesn't tell me, if my fellow human being doesn't tell me? So I think we should come from that place, you know. It's not about hatred, it's not about disgust, it's actually about, I mean, of course we should be disgusted, actually. We should be disgusted by things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala condemns, right? Because there's harm and there's evil in those things. But what I mean is that ultimately it's out of compassion, and it's out of not wanting to see our societies in the West sink and people suffer and be even more suicidal. And I mean, these things are happening in the West more than anywhere else. You know, the suicide rates, the aging population. It's crazy. Like, there's an aging population, and like in Europe, this is why, for example, in Germany, they were allowing so many immigrants in, right? Because they've done the maths and they know that basically, you know, very soon they're going to have an aged population. There's not enough young people to kind of financially, you know, support them, right? Support that kind of burden, if you like. And so they were allowing all these young, basically Muslim immigrants in, right? But the West doesn't really just have an aging population problem. It has a problem of promoting lifestyles that don't help families to thrive. You know, all of these lifestyles, they're not helping families to thrive. Feminism and its kind of putting down and devaluing of motherhood is not allowing families to thrive. This idea, I mean, the number of abortions that are taking place in Western countries, it's like whole populations are being wiped out, you know. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of abortions. And some of them are babies who have a soul, you know, who if a person lost that baby, they would, and it was a wanted baby, you know, they would expect people to sympathize. They would have a funeral, maybe even, you know. So I think all of these things, they should upset us as human beings, you know, that human life is being devalued so much. subhanallah, like it takes faith to have children. That's the thing. It takes faith to want to have a big family. It takes faith to raise that family. And if you don't have faith, what happens is you become overly materialistic. You start worrying about money. And that's why Allah says in the Quran, don't kill your children out of fear of poverty. Because even today, if you pick up one of these magazines about, when people are expecting a baby, I remember reading one and it said, go and talk to your bank manager. I was thinking, God, talk to your bank manager. Like, like there's this narrative, isn't there, that if you don't have the money, you shouldn't be having kids. There's too many people in the world, right? Which is a load of rubbish. It takes faith to have children. It takes a big heart. And when human beings become more and more individualistic, they become more and more anti-family, and they start promoting lifestyles that are basically anti-family. Of course, their populations are going to decrease. And that's what's happening. So I think we as Muslims, I think, Douglas Murray, he wrote that book, The Strange Death of Europe, right? And he's talking about how basically the West is in its decline and Muslims are taking over, right? That's the kind of narrative.
One could make the argument, right? If Islam was politically and militarily dominant, that people are just becoming Muslim because you're the most dominant, material, physical power. But I feel this is almost like an evidence for the authenticity of Islam, that having, without even having the Khilafah, without even having this dominant political or military structure in place, that we have become the moral leaders in the absence of those physical powers. Like, people are coming to it by just sheer recognition of the truth. So it's almost like an evidence for Islam.
Yeah, I think it's in their fitrah, isn't it? Like, obviously deep down. Yeah. But also there's a whole load of people who've just kind of had enough, If you just, you can find different groups of people online as well, like, the red pill guys and all of that lot. You can see they've just kind of like had enough. They're just done. They've just, and so some of them, I think, will have the guts eventually to become Muslim, but others, maybe they just like their, lifestyles too much. But yeah, I think I actually did some research, and my master's research was into female converts to Islam. And one of the things that kept coming up was they were saying they loved the gender roles in Islam. That's actually like one of the main reasons, They just loved the clarity. We take it for granted. But as a human being, how are you supposed to live in this world? Imagine growing up with not even being able to answer some of the most fundamental questions, right? Yeah. We have the answers to those fundamental questions that help us orient ourselves in the world and help us to thrive. And I think one of the things that the women were saying was just knowing, subhanAllah, even when I was talking to Lauren, my friend Lauren Booth, she said all her life she's had to fend for herself as a woman, And when I said to her, God, subhanAllah, like, I was looked after by my dad financially, and then I got married, and then, my husband was responsible for me financially. And she, just listening to that, she said, oh, that just sounds, she said, I never had that. From a young age, I was just always worrying about how I'm going to fend for myself. And that's how I've traveled throughout this world until I became a Muslim, she said. And, now she said, just having a husband and just feeling that he's responsible financially for her. It seems like something so little, but it's a big thing. We only think it's little because we take it for granted. But there's amazing gifts that Islam has given us as women that sometimes women who don't have that recognize, and they see it, more than we do. But I think one of the things you were talking about that I really wanted to add to was, we were talking about the girl who I was telling you about, the mom whose daughter was confused, and
yes,
and I was highlighting some of the things that I noticed that were wrong, that in her upbringing, in a way. I don't want to say that it's always because there's something wrong, it can happen to anyone. It could happen to anyone. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who guides, right? As parents, we can't guarantee anything. We just do our best. We must seek the means as best as possible. So that this is why I'm highlighting this. I think one of the things is that being very aware of who your children's friends are, is absolutely essential. In fact, there comes a point when your children's friends have way more influence on them than you do. And that can be for the good or for the bad. So I remember one of my sons, I've been trying to get him to go back to doing his hifth, and he was showing, he had stopped after a while because he was, and, he was close to being expelled from school. He was having some behavior issues and things like that. As soon as he got in with the right people, he wants to do his hifth again. Like, I didn't even have to say anything. Like, suddenly he's got this desire, this passion for hifth again. Suddenly he's got this passion for deen, and it's and the same thing happened to me in Egypt, right? Like, when my mum moved me into a house with very good sisters from the UK and America who were on deen, that completely changed everything for me, So it really shows you that peers are so, like, as parents, we got to know you should know who your kids' friends are, and you should be inviting them round so that you can definitely check them out. And if need be, you can nudge them in the right direction, or you can help them create friendships if the right sorts of people aren't out there. At school, for example, you should be proactively putting them into clubs, into groups, or creating environments where you can encourage the right sort of friendships, because subhanallah, al-mar'u ala dini khalilihi is absolutely true.
Yes.
You're on religion,
the religion of your companion.
Your companions. And so with this girl, for example, her parents didn't even know who her friends were. For years, she's basically had friends who were feeding into this doubt that she had and encouraging it, and Allah knows best, what kinds of things they were watching and looking at, and you can just imagine, right? So we can't be strangers to our children, and too many parents are doing that. They're allowing their children to come home and be in their own world, on the internet somewhere tucked away, and they're thinking, oh well, at least they're not bothering me, right? Well, they're not bothering you right now, but the bother you're going to get in the future is going to completely eclipse anything you're experiencing now if you don't intervene, if you don't get involved, So let's not be so lazy as parents, sorry to say it, but there's a lot of lazy parenting that goes on, right? Let's actually know what's going on. Let's drag them off the internet. Let them have certain amounts of time. Let there be internet in their room where everyone is there, right? Like a computer, or even if they're on devices, do it in a controlled way, in a limited way, right? And then have that family time, have the family discussions, know who your children's peers are. And the last thing I think that was very apparent was that the mom had noticed that the daughter had started slipping in her Salah years ago, right? And started letting go of certain practices of Islam, like important practices. And she hadn't intervened, And that this is a common thing that you see in situations where parents hit rock bottom. usually it didn't happen overnight, you know. It was a slow burn, right? It's something that was happening, and they were letting it go, letting certain things go. Another uncle once contacted my husband and said his son has gone and moved in with a woman, right? And he's like really distraught, and the father is distraught. And after a bit of digging, you find out that the father never really established the Salah in the house, you know? And I think my husband said to him, you know, your son not praying was a bigger sin than what he's doing right now, you know? We don't see it like that. You start getting upset when your son has moved in with somebody, right? But you weren't upset when your son stopped praying. And the Salah is the thing that would have, inshallah, protected him from going down that route, right? Because Allah says in the Quran that the Salah protects you from fahsha, right? It protects you from fahsha and munkar, evil things, shameless things. It protects you from that. There's a type of psychological protection. And so even like in the case of this mom, I was saying to her, like, you see, when she stopped praying and you stopped making it a rule of the house, because that's how I usually present it, that Salah is, of course, we want our children to love the Salah. If you bring them up feeling connected to Allah and saying to them, you know, don't you think we should thank Allah for everything he's given us? And all he's asked us to do is pray 5 times, right? If you bring them up with that love, then obviously they're going to establish it. But there might be times when one of your children, that doesn't get through to them. And so you've got to make it a rule of the house. You know, it sounds, some parents might not like that kind of language, but it's quite funny, because would you ever allow your child to stop wearing their seatbelt in the car? You know? Would you ever allow your child to stop brushing their teeth even? No, you would be absolutely disgusted, and you would say to your child, excuse me, if you're living in my house, you're going to brush your teeth, right? That's a rule of the house, right? If you're in my car, you're going to wear the seatbelt. And we don't feel at all any feeling of like, oh, I'm being hard on my child for making them do that, right? Why?
Or making them get up in the morning for school. You know, I don't want to get up today, you know, to go to school.
Yeah, we will drag them out of bed if we have to, right? Like, why? It's because we believe in those things. We know that they're good for that child, and we know that if they don't do those things, you know, he's gonna have black teeth, basically, you know, or he's gonna if there's a car crash, he's gonna have a major injury that could damage his brain or whatever, you know, or if he doesn't go to school, he's gonna be a loser, right? Or whatever it is that we think, you know. But we've basically internalized that to such an extent that we don't even think twice about it, right? If you're living under my roof, you're gonna brush your teeth, right? You're gonna do this, you're gonna do that. So why is it when it comes to Salah and a child is starting to slack on the Salah and it's obvious to you that they're doing that it's like, oh, I don't want to be too hard on them, you know, or I don't want to wake them up for Fajr because that's hard. Well, it shows you that you're not putting Allah's commands in the right place, in the position that they should have in your heart and in your family life, right?
Yes.
They can miss school for Salah. They can miss any other things for Salah if necessary.
It's not an extracurricular activity. Salah is the core of your life.
So that's why I'm saying that if need be, you know, if the loving approach, which I believe is the right way, you know, like from a young age, it should be that the child then feels motivated. But everyone goes through laziness as well, right? Like, we know what it was. I know what it was like. There were certain periods of my childhood when I was feeling, or teenage years, when, you know, a bit of fear of God was needed, right? Like, in order to get me to do something, right? So we should make Salah a red line, like, you know, because why? Because again, you don't want your child to suffer in the future, and your child will suffer You know, anytime you know that something's going to cause your child to suffer, you'll try your best to prevent that, right? So know that if you don't help them to establish the salah, in other words, that connection with Allah, then that connection with Allah will then weaken. And this is what this sister was saying to me, that she stopped praying and we just kind of thought, okay, she's just going through a phase. And I said, well, that was a good point at which to, you know, like say, well, no, what's going on? You know, that was when the alarm bells should have started ringing, not years later when things have gotten so bad, you know. And so, yeah, I think it's really important that we say to our children, you know, first of all, through love, through getting them to understand that should be the norm. But if need be, it's got to be a rule of the house. It's a rule of the house. Why? Because it's going to protect them in the future. And I think a lot of the young people, not everyone, but the young people that I've seen anyway, who've sadly gone down a negative trajectory, it didn't happen overnight. You know, just like success doesn't happen overnight. There's a build up. There's quite hard work going on, right? In the same way, these kind of big shocks that families have from their children coming out with a particular announcement or, you know, some deed that upsets their parents, it doesn't happen overnight. There's a slow trajectory that they're going down, and the parents do not intervene early enough. So yeah, the importance of salah, keeping that connection with Allah, because actually, you know, when I just reflect on the story that I told you about what happened to me in Egypt, it could have been a lot worse, you know, if I hadn't felt that connection with Allah and doing the right thing, etc. You know, if that wasn't there, then a person's desires take over, right? A person's instincts take over, because they don't have that inhibition from thinking about Allah, thinking about what the right thing is that they should be doing. And again, talking to Allah. Basically, a child who stopped praying has stopped talking to Allah. And that's how we should view it, very seriously.
Jazakallah khair, sister. Before we conclude, when can we look forward to your new book? I think you have another book in the pipeline, correct? On Aisha radiallahu anha?
Yeah, so this was my first book, Khadija. Oh, can you see that? Khadija, yes. Mother of History's Greatest Nation. And the illustrated version of this has just come out, alhamdulillah. So, and now we've got...
And where can people order that book and the new version? Where can we order that?
Okay, well, it's on Amazon, so I'm not really sure for Canada, but you can have a look. There's a Kindle version as well, but even in as a hardback, it's available on Amazon. So, or you can go to the Learning Roots website, which is learningroots.com, I believe, learningroots.com, and it's called Khadija. So this book is a similar book in the sense that it's written as literature, you know. So the way I've written it is not like a factual textbook, even though everything in it is based on narrations, you know, actual research and narrations and books of seerah, etc. To be honest, with Aisha radiallahu anha, it's not very difficult because she's told us everything. You know, she really narrated so much about herself, about every incident that happened. It's very well documented. So with Aisha radiallahu anha, it's a case of what should we keep? You know, what should we include? And what do we have to leave out just because of you know, space, etc. So this book is going to be about Aisha radiallahu anha, her journey, her life. A lot of people don't realize that, of course, most of her life was after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, right? And the way we've told this story is basically her personal journey from being in the care of her father and her husband, who were her biggest mentors, right? Were great mentors, great guides for her in her life. And then, of course, the Prophet ﷺ passed away. And even Abu Bakr 2 years later passed away. So her the greatest mentors in her life were gone, right? And then I think the part of the story that people are going to find very new is then what happened, when she's lost the two greatest mentors in her life. She's trying to find the best role and purpose, for herself. Mm-hmm. And she gets, of course, involved in different things with good intentions. And then eventually, and of course, that culminates in the incident of the camel. And then eventually she realizes that that's not the space that she wants to be in. That's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants of her. And that the best way that she can serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with her talents is through preserving the sunnah, right? Because she had this unique window into the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that wasn't open to other people, right? She had this amazing memory. She had this amazing intelligence and feistiness and fearlessness in many ways, right? She was very courageous in the sense that she was never afraid to ask a question or to question anything, which is a great blessing for us. And so she spent the rest of her life really raising and teaching a generation of students. A lot of people don't know, but many of Aisha radiallahu anha's top students were her nephews and nieces, some of whom were orphans, So Al-Qasim bin Muhammad, who was one of the 7 fuqaha of Medina, 7 jurists of Medina, he later became. He was one of her top students. And he was the son of Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, right? Her brother, who was killed in Egypt. And she basically raised, or she kind of mentored and raised his son. Another one of her students was Aisha bint Talha, who was the daughter of Talha bin Ubaidillah, who of course was in the incident of the camel, who was killed there. And he also Talha happened to be her brother-in-law. She had a sister called Kulthum. Aisha had a sister called Kulthum, and Talha was her husband. So basically, her sister became widowed that day. And of course, Zubair as well was killed on that day. So during that incident, and so his children, Abdullah bin Zubair, Urwa bin Zubair, at least Urwa, he became an orphan, right? He was still very young. And so Aisha radiallahu anha actually raised the daughter, she mentored and taught the daughter of Talha bin Ubaidillah. His name is Aisha bin Talha. And she raised and mentored Qasim bin Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr's son. And she mentored and was very close to Urwa bin Zubair, who is, of course, her sister Asma's son, right? Youngest son. So anyway, I mean, it's just really amazing when you really go into it, you realize all the connections and all the. So on that day when she's coming back from the incident of the camel and she's so upset and she's so self-reflective and she's thinking about the verses of Quran that said, and stay in your homes, and she's feeling really regretful because that was the thing that was said to the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, right? People don't realize that she was going home to her widowed and orphaned family, Her own sister's husband had been killed, and many of her nephews and nieces' fathers had been killed. So there was that double kind of pain there. But what I really found inspiring was that Aisha radiallahu anha, even though after the incident of the camel, and of course she went there with good intentions, wanting to seek justice for the killing of Uthman radiallahu anhu, when she came back and she really felt that that had been going out and marching or protesting had been a mistake as far as she was concerned, it didn't make her feel like that failure, we could call it a sense of failure, should cause her to disappear, should cause her to just curl up and hide, right? What she did instead, and I think this is something that I find very inspiring, is she channeled her energy and her efforts into, she did a lot of self-reflecting. It's very obvious that she did that. And she channeled all her energy and effort into the direction that she felt she should have been on, or she should go on, which is teaching the sunnah to the next generation from her unique position as mother of the believers. And I think in that there's inspiration for us, when you face a setback, or you make a mistake, or you do something, you had good intentions, but later it becomes clear to you that it wasn't the right thing for whatever reason. That's not a sign that you should give up and stop doing everything. It just means you need to adjust. You're doing the wrong thing there, but it doesn't mean that there's nothing for you to do. Change your direction. Ask yourself, what is Allah asking of me? How could I serve the deen, and how could I serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala best with the talents and the privilege that I have? Because all of us have some privilege. And then go in that direction more confidently, because now you've learned from your mistakes, right?
Yes.
So yeah,
that's a sign of wisdom, actually. It's not necessarily don't make the mistake in the first place, but that you go through that self-reflective process and or have the ability to correct.
Yeah, so I think in this book we try to maintain, I've tried to maintain the love of the Sahaba, right? The position of the Sahaba, but we don't hide from the fact that they were humans, they made mistakes, but we help this book is aimed at children aged 12 and over. With the Khadija book, many adults read it. It's not really just designed for children, but it can be. And we do have children in mind. So we're going to help them to build their love and their understanding of Islam through this story, but also feel that connection with the Sahaba, understand some of what happened afterwards that was very difficult, and help them to empathize with the Sahaba and understand how to view the Sahaba in relation to that, so that their kind of respect for the Sahaba is maintained, but that we learn from their humanness.
I look forward to actually when that comes out and reading it and sharing it with my family, especially. So I have to appreciate the time, wisdom, and knowledge that you shared with us, your experience. We definitely need more people like you in our community standing up, and we need to promote this type of voice that actually stands up for the haqq, because there's too many voices out there that are actually leading us down a dark path. So I was really pleased and with this conversation and what we were able to exchange. I think this is going to be a really memorable podcast. So we really thank you, Jazakallah khairan, for your time and your contribution.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khairan, brother, for the opportunity to share some of that.
So to our audience, inshallah, as always, remember, we live by the haqq, we die by the haqq, and just when you think life is stuck, tune in to Life Haqq. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.